Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest narration of the web series The Survivor Becomes a Dungeon. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 151, Vidmore Point of View. Your son? Chris asked, more than a little uncertain, as he watched Frady bring her paws up to Basmore's shoulders, standing on her rear paws and resting her chin against the top of his head, while she audibly rumbled with delight. Of course, can't you tell? He obviously inherited my good looks, I mused, gently patting Frady's head while she doted on her brother. Though, now that I said that, I do see some of my own features on him, and I can only say that this was any real certainty thanks to the dream walking I had done with Revire and Rita, and the time I spent walking through the memories of my childhood. He's got my nose, and I'm almost certain he's got my chin as well. Whether that just happened to be a quirk of coincidence, or if Basmore really decided to model himself after me, I don't care. He's my handsome little guy, regardless. I'm sorry, but how? Wasn't he just your familiar? Chris asked, looking even more uncertain as he walked closer to us, while looking over Basmore with a healthy amount of curiosity. Basmore glanced up at me as well, wondering how I was going to explain this. He was a little worried, too, since he felt that he was causing me unnecessary trouble. I just smiled a little more and gently poked Basmore's cheek before looking at Chris. Well, I'm not about to explain how I've been travelling with my son and daughter while they look like beasts. Wouldn't that be confusing? I asked, which earned an obligatory nod from Chris. As for why they're like this, well, you're going to have to ask their mother. She handles their trading, and she's rather a Spartan in her methods. I could tell several things confused him as he looked between me and the cubs, and Lugosi had also hopped up onto the bed at this point and comfortably relaxed there. I'm sorry, Frady is your daughter, and you have a wife who you had kids with, and what does Spartan mean? He asked, doing his best to maintain his professionalism despite all the new information coming his way, before glancing over at Lugosi curiously. Are you also a person? Lugosi just put on a wolfish smile as his tail slowly swayed behind him. Maybe. I'm not sure yet. He teased kindly before resting his head along his forepaws. I couldn't help but chuckle at Lugosi's response as I regarded Chris again. I needed to come up with a good story, since I may have been playing along because I was in such a good mood, but this likely wouldn't make sense to most people, so I needed to somehow be convincing. Let's start by answering his question one at a time. Yes, Frady and Basmore are my children. I do have more, but these two stowed away when I left for my trip, I mentioned, poking both Frady and Basmore's cheeks as the two siblings shared a small but mischievous grin. This earned a small nod from Chris, who still looked a little confused by the fact that Basmore was now a child instead of a cub, but I continued anyway. As for that wife comment, well, not yet, I mentioned with a bit of a smile. We're still dating, though she is my partner, and I consider her to be my right hand. There is no one else I trust in the world more than I trust her. At that, I glanced at Frady and Basmore before looking back at Chris. And no, I didn't have kids out of wedlock or anything like that. They're not my flesh and blood. But I've known them their whole lives and consider them to be mine regardless. I could feel that last comment struck a chord with Chris as he considered his own home life and the father who abandoned him and his sister. He just gave me a little nod, finding a seat at the arm of the couch in the sitting area as he intently listened to what else I had to say. In regards to what Spartan means, well, that's just a very specific style of training. However, as the idea comes to mind, I have a realization that I could work with this line of thought now that I'm putting it into words. I couldn't help but let a small smile creep from my lips as I start to bullshit my cubs and Basty's backstories. They came from a reclusive clan of beast-skinned shapeshifters who usually keep to themselves for the most part. Chris's eyes widened with interest and surprise, his fluffy foxtail swishing while his ears perked at the attention. Shapeshifters? Really? I've heard about people with that kind of ability, but I've never met one in person. His mind wandering to various rumour mills that he was aware of, talking about this and that before regarding Basmore carefully. He actually believed that, not to mention there are really shapeshifters out there. I do my best to maintain a more neutral expression and nodding. Yes, and the clan call themselves Romans, and whenever they stay they call their territory Rome, since they're always on the move, never truly staying in one place for all too long. The warriors of their clan are called Spartans, and their training is so difficult that it is usually used as a means to describe how difficult things can be. Chris nodded along, seeming more and more intrigued with the utter bullshit that I was spouting, before looking Basmori and Freddy over curiously. So why have they been acting as cubs this entire time? I understand wanting to keep a low profile, but wouldn't it be more comfortable for your kids to move around as beaskin instead of their shifted forms? At that, I just smiled a bit gently, patting Freddy's head as she audibly rumbled and purred with delight. More comfortable, yes. However, they can't shift back until they're able to overcome the curse placed on them by their mother for their training, I explained as I gestured over to Basmori. While fighting by my side this morning, Basmori had a breakthrough and was able to finally break the curse, allowing him to shift back into a beastkin. Whoa! Oh, curse? That's rough, he murmured contemplatively, his mind again wandering back to memories of rumour mills and the like, though he does briefly consider a guild member he knew that got cursed by some kind of trap, before shuddering as he tried to block out the memory, before he thought too much about it. But to curse your own kids, how long have they been like that? He asked with a rather genuine concern. I smiled a little more, appreciating how worried he was about my string of lies. It's only been a few months. It's done when they come of age, and they have to learn how to harness their mana heart to their fullest in order to break the forced shifting, I said, as I looked to Freddy and then back at Basmori again. As of right now, Basmori is the first of his siblings to reach the stage, though I'm sure it's only a matter of time until the others are able to do the same. Damn, that's rather impressive, he considered before looking at Basmori, and I could tell that he was experimentally tapping into our shared bond to try and gauge his strength, but his ears twitched with surprise. By the gods, that little kid is stronger than me, and he managed to keep up with you and fight at your side, he asked rhetorically before shaking his head. This world is so unfair at times. I chuckled a little bit before regarding Chris again. Well, my kid's got an early start. You're only just going down that sort of path. Don't worry, if you really want to get stronger, then just stick with me, and I'll definitely help you along your way. As Chris goes to speak, I suddenly get a flash of memories that weren't my own. Just taking a moment to focus on them, I peer into the last moment to see Greed cornering someone in the woods before plunging a sword into the chest, while maintaining a most cold-blooded eye contact as he watched the life fade from their eyes. Well, I suppose whatever he was doing, he managed to win out in the end. I haven't gotten any messages from the sinners since I set out, so I just have to hope that whatever they're up to, it hasn't needed my direct intervention or advice. Vito, did you hear what I said? Chris asked, and it was only then that I realized I was so focused on the memories that came my way that I didn't pay attention to what he was saying. Sorry about that. I just got a message from one of my subordinates, and it was a little overstimulating, I explained while waving a hand rather dismissively. Chris looked at me curiously before tilting his head while his ears flicked in thought. That reminds me, I noticed some of your other people were also in town. How many people do you have bonds with? Oh, you're talking about Wither and Blight, right? I asked, though I could tell that he didn't know their names. Those are their names? Really? Seems rather contrary to being healers, Chris asked skeptically, while tilting his head again, which made his ears slightly flop. I just grinned at that before shrugging a bit. I don't actually know their names. That's just the monikers they go by, and they haven't needed to introduce themselves to me since they started working for me. In the meantime, it hasn't compromised their ability to heal, and I don't mind either way. Chris nodded in understanding. Once I said that, something clicking, fitting into place as he listened. Ah, I see. So they're also travelling under a false name, he asked, and I could tell that he was referring to me, and when he said that, Oh, so you figured out Vito isn't my real name. Good on you. I mused, though I suddenly got the impression that Lugosi was feeling vaguely distressed for some reason. Chris just flashed a little grin as his ears waggled from my comment. Oh, it was nothing difficult. Lugosi over there was just a little too earnest when referring to you. I suppose he isn't used to using your alias. I just chuckled softly, glancing over to Lugosi and smiling a little more. It's okay, Lugosi. I suppose it isn't that big of a secret since he's working with us now. Though, with that, I looked over at Chris and smirked almost mischievously. That doesn't mean I intend on telling you my real name any time soon. Not that you would even know who I am, regardless if you knew it or not. Chris just offered a small shrug before smiling a little as his tail swished slowly behind him. It doesn't matter to me. You could be a devil for all I care. You've given my sister a second chance at life, and possibly more. For that, my life is yours. I was a little taken aback by that sudden tangent, but I could tell he meant every word of it, despite his nonchalance. Well, I'll be mindful to make sure that you live a long and happy one, if that's the case. Both you and your sister deserve that much, I offer with a smile before remembering something and smiling a bit. By the way, the elite of this village are holding a feast in my honor, and to celebrate their survival today. But I'm not sure how big the event is going to be. They are inviting me and all those I consider to be my people to celebrate with them. Chris looked fairly intrigued by the comment, but then he quickly realized something as his ears perked at the attention. Wait, you're saying we're invited to this feast too? I nodded once as I looked Chris over. I'm sure the dress code doesn't really matter much, but I suppose you, your sister, and your team ought to clean up best you can. I believe they also mentioned that they would provide us with rooms to stay in, so be sure to spread the word to the others, I said before smirking a little. Also, be mindful about your friend's sticky fingers. It'll be a bit too obvious if things go missing after spending a night as a guest here. Chris was rather surprised by the idea of enjoying a feast held by elites, his mind first going to his sister, getting to enjoy a meal that they could only dream of, and sleeping in rooms filled with things that they'd likely never afford. Though, at the mention of his team, Chris couldn't help but look vaguely indignant, opening his mouth to reply with some sort of snide comment before taking a moment to think on it. Actually, you might be right about that, he admitted as he scratched the back of his head. Anyways, thanks for bringing Lugosi and Fraley over. You should probably head back to the others and let them know what's happening tonight, I mentioned as I walked towards the double doors of my room. Chris nodded dutifully, getting up from the arm of the couch as he followed me to the door. Right, of course, boss, he said simply, and soon made his way out as I locked the door behind him. Now on my own again, I looked over to Lugosi, only to find that he was sound asleep. I could tell that he was rather exhausted after everything that happened today, and once he was laying in the bed, there was little to keep him from dozing off. Now looking over at Basmori, I watched as he suddenly engulfed himself in shadow, shifting back into being a cub as he gently roughhoused with Fraley, rolling her off of his back while he hopped around across the plush bed. Fraley, for her part, just laughed with delight as she rolled across the sheets before bounding after him along the massive bed. Now then, what am I going to do with you? I mused to Basmori. The cub in turn looked up at me curiously, before being tackled by Fraley the next moment, since he wasn't paying attention. I couldn't help but chuckle at the scene as I sat on the bed, the cubs quickly wrestling between each other to see who would make it on my lap first. Despite how being the less powerful of the two, Fraley managed to slip past Basmori by bouncing off his back before claiming her victory and settling on my lap as she mischievously lashed her tail behind her. Basmori, for his part, looked vaguely annoyed, before smirking as the shadows engulfed him, shifting back into a bee skin and looking as smug as could be, while sticking his tongue out at her. Watching him change between forms, I wondered how he got so used to easily using his shadowy wings as storage space, as I could see them magically pulling my poncho around his body, before letting the shadows retreat to his back. As Basmori stuck his tongue out at Fraley just settled on my lap, scooting around and getting cozy, despite Basmori's taunts. You two are hilarious, I mused softly, rubbing Fraley's back before reaching out and patting Basmori's hair. Well, now that I've told our group that you guys are my kids and not my familiars, I'm going to start presenting you as my kids around here at least. Can I talk more? Fraley asked curiously as she looked up at me with a charming feline smile. Though at my words, Basmori started to wither a bit as his mind wandered to the kids back at the haven and the idea of wearing proper clothes and eating using his hands instead of just his mouth. I chuckled softly for a moment as I gently patted the top of Fraley's head. I don't see why not. At least around here it shouldn't be draw too much attention after making it known. Though I then looked over at Basmori and gently poked his forehead. And yes, you have the right idea. We're gonna need to get you some clothes, and you're likely gonna have to eat like a person. But don't worry, I'll help you with that for sure. Bazmore's rounded ears sagged a little at the prospect of playing at being a person, though he then looked over his hands and flexed his fingers, clenching and unclenching his hands as he made little fists, his thoughts going to Basti as he watched her training to act like a human. That's right, you're just like Basti now. Sure, you still need to train, but you can hold your head up high now that you've managed to follow her path, I explained enthusiastically, doing my best to really sell the idea of acting like a person now that he's got the ability to shapeshift. You can make a good person, Rayleigh added encouragingly, smiling more sincerely with her adorable little feline face. Bazmore still looked a little unsure, but after a minute or so of thought, he simply huffed and nodded, just accepting his fate of having to wear proper clothes. Glad to see that you're on board. Now then, where do we find clothes? I considered aloud while stroking my chin, my eyes wandering over to the cord that dangled from the ceiling. I suppose if you need something, it's best to ask those who would know where to find it, I commented for the cubs while reaching out and gently tugging on the cord as a faint bell sounded off in the distance. End of chapter. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Sevaren Serberous, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Casper Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Lightjock, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.